Hello and welcome to episode 38 of the DX Mentor, Improving Your DX Experience Part 2. Thank you for joining us. I'm Bill, AJ8B. If this is the first time you're joining us, welcome. We have a back catalog of 35 episodes covering many aspects of DX in both podcast and YouTube format. Please check us out. If you like what you find, please subscribe and like the episode. If you don't, please drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com and let me know what you'd like to hear. Our guest today is Ralph Bellis, K9ZO. Here's a bit of bio on Ralph. My interests include technology, entrepreneurship, contesting, DXing, CW, VHF, propagation, and being very active on the UHF bands. DXpeditions really excite me. I'm an assistant director, 50-year member, and life member with the ARRL. I'm a past president, state coordinator, and former board member of the Society of Midwest Contesters, W9SMC. I'm the former Contesting on a Budget column editor for the National Contest Journal. I'm a former member of the Metro DX Club. I've earned 10-band DXCC, 10-band WAS, and the Triple Play Award. I am active with DXCC Challenge with 2,911 slots. For DXCC Honor Roll, I have 358 mixed, 353 CW, 358 phone, and 319 digital countries. I earned 5-band WAZ as well. I've been fortunate enough to have been part of DX teams, which were awarded DXpedition of the Year status. Joe, W8GEX, an accomplished DXer in his own right, will also be with us. Since we aired part 1 2 weeks ago, I've gotten some excellent comments, and many listeners have mentioned that they've learned more from part 1 than they have learned from being on the air for a couple of years. I was really thrilled to hear that, and I know that part two is also jam-packed with great information. So without any further delay, let's get started.
This slide we're showing you right now is out of my shack door. And basically it's a flat horizon and there's nothing there.
Wow.
There's a
Wow.
tree, and that's, I can count the insulators on the power line. So
Yeah.
that's my view pretty much east, is there's nothing out in that direction and it's quiet.
So-
Unfortunately, we're gonna put a 400 kV line about a mile to the south of here, but I think they maintain the high voltage ones pretty well.
This PVC pipe that's about 4 foot in the air that's got a T on the top, is that for your beverage?
Looks familiar.
That is an east-west beverage, and we have deer that come here because there's some woods around. And the way I do beverages, I have a fiberglass pole, the kind that you use to mark driveways for snow plowing stuff.
Yeah.
So about a 3-foot piece of pole, and it takes me like a dozen whacks to get it in the ground. And then I have a 2 by 2 inch square piece of like plywood or any kind of wood with a hole drilled in it, 3/8 inch hole, because as this thing rocks back and forth and gets loose, it kind of like waddles itself and digs itself out, and then your hole gets loose, your beverage is fallen over. So it's a T at the top and there's a slit in it, so I can slip the wire rack down. But what the good part about this, I don't use T-posts and wire it all in, because if a deer was to get into that, he would just pull it off of that fiberglass pole. It'd be laying on the ground and he wouldn't get hurt. But I've seen them where they just hop over 4-foot poles. It's not like, I don't know how they can see in the dark, but they do that. Thing that was most interesting after being out here since 2018, that we actually had a herd of cattle run through the 40-meter foursquare about a week ago. My neighbor's got cows that got out, and his wife was herding them when they're a 4-wheeler, and they come run. They didn't do any damage at all because it's not finished, and that stuff would be underground. But how often do cattle like run through your antenna?
Yeah.
I've got 4 beverages, Ralph, using that concept. K4 Sugar Victor told me about it several years ago, and I am a believer of that. And my tees are not glued on, just in case a deer would hit it. But I watch my deer either go under them or go over them.
Mm-hmm.
But I've never, better knock on wood, I've never had a deer take one of my beverages out.
Yeah, and I'm lucky that, they don't get tangled up or something like that. That'd be more maintenance work for me.
Yes.
Have you ever had Have you ever had a bird fly into it, to go back to your islands?
No, never seen any piles of dead birds near the beverages.
Birds are smarter than that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So here's a map of why countries are difficult to get. So you go down the first set of countries that are in North Africa, but the next set, and this map shows the political coups in 2021, Sudan, then west of that, Chad in 2021, then Niger in 2021, and then Mali in 2020 and 2021, and Guinea and Burkina Faso. That entire layer of countries has had military coups in the last couple years. That kind of explains why these places are a little bit difficult to get. Next one. So let's talk a little bit about expeditions, because I think you have to understand what's happening at the other side. I mean, I see comments on DXing, it's like, it drives me crazy, you know, that people think that we can communicate with a DXpedition and they're paying attention to DX Summit and we can thank for the QSO, but they don't realize that DXpeditions are really not luxurious. It's got to be guys that are kind of like lunar crazy, or I'm not sure, but there's not, you know, it takes a long time sometimes to get there and it's uncomfortable. I can remember when we went to Salernitans where we were all issued a bucket so we could vomit in it, you know, and when we were on the ship for 10 days. You have a whole lot of equipment and food to manage for a big group of people. So if you're on a boat, guys are going to get seasick, or they're just going to stay in bed for the whole time you're traveling. And so it's interesting that a lot of times the makeup of the team, it's guys that are pretty mellow. They can handle this kind of stuff. They complain. It's like, okay, well, what can we do to help out and fix this? And so, you know, I think guys have multiple skills. They might be good operators, but as we had earlier, you do bring a doctor if you can on some of these expeditions, but you know, maybe you have a guy that's like an electrical engineer and they can figure out some antennas, or you got a guy that's good with the mechanics, or a guy that knows how to get a generator to work. So a lot of different things with these expeditions, but it's the team and how you get together and have that group. And once you arrive, everybody's really exhausted. So you don't necessarily, from viewpoint, is when a DXpedition arrives, it's like, well, I don't expect them to be on the air the first day. Maybe they'll have one station and they'll be able to get on the air and kind of start and let people know that they're there, but they're tired and it's going to be hot, windy, cold. It'll be nasty out there. Otherwise, there'd already be guys living there, or there's be cities there, there'd be activity there if it was paradise, you know?
Yeah.
But it's really dangerous to go to some of these places. And I look back at places I just sort of casually went, and it's like, well, that's where all the people are coming from right now that are at the southern border of the United States. They're fun. But I mean, the cool thing is no matter what expeditions you go on, there's something that's really different about them. You know, it might be, how do we get all this stuff where we're going? Do we have to ship it out months in advance, or can we go very lightweight and pretty much carry everything that we need on our airplane? And then sometimes, you know, it's like, well, how do we actually get the license for this place? You know, the proper license, and who do we contact? And do they even have a way to give us a license? The equipment, it's kind of fascinating because we look at some of the equipment these expeditions are bringing, and I think, where do they get that stuff from? It's not what I'm used. It's not what I'm used to. It's not, you know, it used to be Kenwood. It's not Kenwood or Icon or something that we're familiar with in the United States, and they have a lot of different equipment in other places in the world.
Mhm.
So it's different. And the thing that's interesting too is a lot of people are now using hex beams because they could get on the work bands easily, and they got a little bit of gain. And it's not like we used to try to bring a lot of aluminum tubing. You know, it makes more sense to be taking what I've got available right now. Each expedition's got its own danger. I mean, guys get sick or they get injured, or maybe it's your boats or your transportation, or just like, you know, being in a dangerous area and you need to have some guards around, that kind of thing. different kind of team and the way people get together and act, and the fun that they have together and the relationships you develop. Each expedition's got a certain amount of rarity, or they wouldn't be going. So it might be on particular bands. There hasn't been much activity on the low bands. If you look at a lot of these kind of holiday travelers, they're on 10 through 40. Maybe they're bringing 10 through 40 vertical, and it's like, well, there's this pent up demand for 80 and 160 and low band stuff. So some countries that, they might have people that go on expeditions, but if they went during sunspot lows, then there's this big on 10 meters where people haven't gone. And then propagation is just fascinating, because some places, even if you have good antennas, it's really hard to work. It's just really, some places it's like, it's easier to work antipode all the way in the opposite side of the world, because any path that's open, you can contact them. But some places are just difficult. The locative islands are really far away. In general, India is pretty hard to get for us. Way in the South Pacific can be difficult. A lot of the Asian stuff from here is really hard. The East Coast has a difficult time because they have to go through our rural zones over the North Pole to get into Asia. So propagation is fascinating. And when you start realizing that, well, wait a minute, there's this short path, but us can certain times of the day and certain seasons beam the other direction. And as the sun is starting to light up the sky, we have a propagation path for a short amount of time that we work some of these guys. I mean, that's the way I managed to get Bouvet on 17 meters, is saying, well, there's a path opened over Japan. We would normally, if we're going to go over the southern tip of Africa to get to Bouvet and point the antennas there, but as the band matures in the morning, there's a path for us over Japan, and that's the time to get them.
Wow. All of this kind of underscores another topic Joe and I always harp on, is that, I'm sitting in my basement. I just missed you guys on 30 meters. I'm pissed, and I slam my fist down. I go upstairs and say, why couldn't those guys have done this? Or maybe I did work them and now I'm happy and I'm done and I'm looking for something else. You guys still have time there to finish. You got to tear everything down. You got to get home. You've got the financial hit that you took. Now you've got to worry about, the equipment being put back. You got to make sure that all the paperwork's in place. All the QSL cards have got to, I mean, it's my point in bringing this up almost every podcast, I think, Hanjo, is to just make people, this is really a big deal these guys are doing. And if they really are asking you for 15 or 20 bucks, just at least take all that into account. If you can't afford it, you can't afford it. But if you can, and you're choosing not to, just take all that into account. And, I'm sitting here, so I wasn't willing to go do that. So I'll give you a lot of credit for doing that for me, Anyway.
A lot of times, Bill, some of the trips I had been on, it took us 2 years to plan it, 10 to 15 days to execute it. And then we would still be working on it a year later, because you have to return all this equipment. It all has to be in good shape. And then the QSLs. And of course, now we have QSL managers for years and years. One of the team members, did all the QSL work. I know Swain's, for example, that I was on, I would never, ever go back to that place. That was just terrible. The heat was so bad. The island on that was fine. It was uninhabited and there was no dangers. But like Ralph said earlier in one of his slides, that the heat in some of these places is just overbearing.
Wow. So we're going to talk about some of the DXpeditions you've had some time with, and this is fascinating.
Yeah, that's one of the good things about, and of course I would encourage people to do an expedition, or do a holiday one to the Caribbean, because then you get a sense of what it's like. But each expedition, there was something that was really kind of unique about it that you remembered. In the South Cooks, we hadn't had 30 meters for all that long. I was just amazed at how easily and how strong the European signals were coming. Virtually on the other side of the world, 30-meter propagation was just amazing to be able to work that many guys on CW. That was neat. Another thing you want to do on an expedition, if you can, is learn a little bit about the country. So we went to church on Sunday because we had heard that the ladies dress up in bonnets and fancy dresses, and their singing is amazing. And even though we were kind of like in tourist clothes and jeans, they let us go high in the balcony, so we weren't really noticed. But to be able to take in a little bit of their culture and what it was like was great. We took an eco tour because what do hear these little guys on an island? What do they have to do to kind of make some money? And you know, one guy rented kayaks and you could go out in the calm water. We had an eco tour where they would tell us here's the edible plants, and they taught us how here's the right way. If you look at a coconut, you can kind of looks like a face, and if you crack it on the top here, this is the way you get coconut to open, and you can drink it and get fluid, but not too much. You'll get sick, but you can survive a little, you know, eat the coconut and drink some of that. So here's a local guy. He's got a little business where he just brings people around and he, you know, shows them some of the plants and things that they can do. The other thing I thought that was interesting is you can get a Cook Island driver's license. So somewhere they got to use driver's license machine, and you would rent a motorcycle, and they would kind of follow you around. And this island had one road that circled it, and you could go either clockwise or counterclockwise, and a bus that went in each direction. But basically, you could get issued a driver's license. So instead of charging you a bunch of fees when you got in, people would want to go with like, hey, it's cool to have a Cook Island driver's license, you know, that I could have. So that, you know, those are some of the memories of that. Belize, I went there and visited a friend that had taught at the university here, and he used to come over to my shack all the time so he could talk to his friends in Bulgaria. But it was so hot. You know, you could touch the walls of the building. It was just so warm and hot. And, you know, I went in some caves where the artifacts were right there, 100-year-old cave pottery and skeletons. And I didn't realize at the time I would have spent the entire time on 6 meters. It was just open all the time, like 10 meters with, and had a, you know, crappy FT100D that you could tell 100 kcs wide that there was activity, but 6 meters was tremendous opening. South Orkneys, I guess that was one of the times that maybe we were in danger. We were on a Zodiac, a rubber raft, and the engine died. Mm-hmm. And nobody forgot to be on the boat with the spare Zodiac to come rescue us. So we are in the middle of the, you know, offshore, too far, we couldn't swim, it was cold, there were icebergs around, but the Zodiac died, and I thought, maybe we were in danger, you know, because there's nobody to rescue you, but luckily we got the engine running again. And then the Braveheart crew was really the reason we were successful, because they just pitched in and built us a ladder to get up in the cliffs above the rocks and land, and helped us pitch the tent and cooked and brought meals to the island. So that crew really made the trip successful. But it's interesting, you're on an expedition, you think you can always call CQ and people will come back to you. And we have some video where all of our 6 stations were calling CQ and the bands were dead, and there's nobody to work. You just take a break. On Wake Island, you know, we had to push for the low bands. A lot of effort to get, you know, be on 160, and we made about 2,000 contacts on 160. It's kind of interesting that, you know, because of political changes from when we went until now, I would like to go back, you know, so many times I think I don't need to go back to a place I've been for. There's so many places to see, but that's pretty rare right now. Mm-hmm. You know, and it's easy. They had accommodations, but that's kind of protecting the United States border in terms of being aware of what's happening in the Pacific. So it's not a tourist place anymore. Yeah. Kermadec, we were able to go there because the captain of the boat had been asked to help with a rescue mission when the volcano blew up and one of the conservation workers couldn't be found. And he said, yeah, we'll lead a team and go look. And at the right time, he asked, there's some ham radio guys that would like to come. Could they visit? And 6 months later, we were there.
Oh,
Subsequent
Wow.
group have asked, because they've returned that place to its natural state. They got rid of the rat and the cat and all the plants that didn't belong. We had to be thoroughly inspected for seeds that didn't belong to make sure that there was like no mice in any of our equipment. And so they've got that place under control. So the answer was, for groups that want to go back now, it doesn't meet with our ideas conservation anymore. So it's a rare one. But it was interesting to go there, sit at the picnic table, sign in the book and turn the page, and there was Jacques Cousteau had signed in.
No kidding.
I looked and said Caterpillar headquarters used to be about 50 miles from here, so there's a lot of equipment like that, but there was a Caterpillar bulldozer there that they had used to build a runway at one time, and it had sat there for dozens of years and was all rusty. And I was cruising the internet one day, and I found that the local conservation workers there figured out how to get that thing started. They were driving it around.
really?
And it's like, who would have thought, a 1950 some vintage bulldozer, and these guys figured out how to get it to work. I went to Bermuda with my wife. It was a time when there was a hurricane. It passed right over the island, but since it was coral that was porous, the water just went through. After it was over, they went out and brushed off the sidewalks, and that was kind of it. Their buildings out of concrete, and they're prepared for it. Venezuela, Nicaragua, Colombia, different than when we went. Those were really good experience. HC8N, we set the world record for WPXCW, 12,640 QSO. The station is totally gone now. And I guess the other thing is we're getting older. We might not be so energetic to undertake some places that we had before.
Wow.
So from the DX end, it's a little different. You're tired. We operate in shifts usually. The first couple days are inefficient because so many people are calling. You can't really get into the groove of quick QSOs. People call on top of each other. The pileup is tremendous. So, if you're 100 on a vertical, give it a try, but don't feel bad if you don't get through the first day or so, because there's just this wall of people calling. I put this in there, so there's a lot of lids, because it's true. I mean, you can hear them from both ends, and you just have to say, okay, well, I know he was coming back to me. That was part of my call sign, but you didn't get through. So you have to kind of learn patience from both sides. I mean, a lot of what we see is the site that DXpedition had to choose has a bunch of constraints. There might be electrical noise, a small garden, or there's some, where it's like, well, we left our beverages out overnight, the wire was stolen, so we can't do that anymore. You remember, you're bringing all the antennas with you, so you're not going to be able to set up really huge things, and I'm impressed that we have a lot of, it's good equipment now. So you can operate a number of transmitters pretty close to each other. I mean, sometimes separate by a mile or two, but we've got a lot of different stations. We got a lot of operators. So your opportunity to catch them on many different bands quickly is another reason why this is a time. Don't skimp on 17 meters or 12 meters. This is the time to go in after those things, because you'll kind of regret it later when there's no activity. The other thing to recognize, and you'll see it, these little whiny things on DX Summit, but you have to realize that, like, if you're trying to, our normal thing is when we operate on almost any band and we're north of the Caribbean and we want to contact South Africa, those are easy. It's north-south. We can do that kind of stuff really easy. So think of the world as rotating, and here's an African DXpedition. Who's going to get it first? There's a few Middle East guys that are early, And then there's going to be tons and tons of Europeans getting through. And maybe we can hear that expedition pretty well, but you got to kind of wait till the volume of Europeans get through. So if you hear these whiny things about, oh, they're only working their home guys back in their home countries, it's like, that's propagation. You know, that's what you would kind of expect, that they got to work the numbers down and thin the pileup out, and propagation's going to dominate. And then likewise, the guys here with the big signals, they're going to get through too before you do. So it's a patient thing, but don't be too patient or they'll be gone.
Right.
You'll miss them. So the final thing is learn when those openings are going to occur. And that helps to be on the air and listening for countries that are kind of in a similar area. And then, you know, there's openings you may not know about, but since these guys are on 24 hours a day, where a normal guy's got to go to work, or, you know, he's got other things to do, these expeditions, you're going to find openings that you didn't know occurred. It'll be, you know, maybe it's like, well, the normal couple guys are on from that country don't get on 10 and 15 meters very much. And you'll find that there's great openings there that we didn't know about. So it's interesting when you're on a DXpeditions that you'll find out a lot more about propagation, is like how early signals are getting through, who the loud guys are. From our end, go ahead.
The other thing that I'm always concerned about is, you know, it's like, okay, they're going to be there 2 weeks, so I'm going to wait a week. And then all of a sudden you read about this coronal mass eruption and propagation's gone.
Yes.
So I agree with you 100%, but I'll still sit there and listen that first week, because something may crack and I may be able to get them. And sooner the better. It's almost never for me the first or second day, but I'm in there. But the third day on, you got to be in there knocking the rust off, because you don't know what the sun's going to do, right? So
yeah, and there's from our end some techniques, because ideally, if you think you're loud enough that the guy will actually hear you, we may not be as loud as the East Coast is, getting somewhere to the east of us, but if you can learn your call sign and learn to copy calls real fast, then you can be tuning through the pileup and find out where the guys are working, and he's tuning up the band, and you can kind of see what, you know, you just imagine what his hand is doing on that VFO, and is he looking for a clear spot so he can top any call sign at all? Because there's this thunder coming from him, all of these guys calling at once. So when you improve your skill, you learn, I can follow what he's doing with his hand on the VFO, and I can figure out how to work him. So you got to be loud enough so he can actually hear you. But then you might say, okay, he seems to be getting people, you know, about half a KC up, and then a bunch of guys find him and it must get cleared, and he moves up a little bit more. And then you're saying, well, you know what? I'm going to go up above where that group is. So the next time he moves his VFO a little bit, I'm going to be in that clear spot and I have a chance of getting him. And the other technique too is, depends on what the guy is doing, but sometimes guys will, you know, that are done a lot, they'll work through the whole pileup, and then sitting up there at the top are the weak guys. And they're up there just saying, I know it's going to take a while, but eventually he's going to get to the top of the pileup. Now, some guys don't. They'll work halfway through the pileup, then they go back to the bottom again and just work half the pileup. And the other thing which I've done, which K6MM taught me when we were in Galapagos, is I might be W, but I'll open my filter really wide and I'll just work whoever I can hear. And from your viewpoint, it's as if I'm wiggling that VFO all over the place, getting people. I'm just making it easy. I'm not even moving the VFO. I'm just working the loud guys to thin the pile up down. So you have to kind of figure out what this guy doing. But eventually, when things calm down and he's tuning through the whole pileup, you can sit at the top end and say, it'll take a while. You know, I'll look at something on the computer, I'll read a book, or I'll do some paperwork stuff, but I'm going to be sitting up there at the top when he gets to the top and it's more in the clear. So you have to know the competitive of your station And should you go in there and say, I'm loud enough, I can get through, or should I wait and say, propagation's coming? This is still pretty early, you know, it's earlier than I normally hear guys in that area, so I'll wait. You might say, you know, is it better or worse later on or not? You know, right now, I don't know if those guys in Asia that you were catching on 12, they are faded out. For us about now, they'd probably be kind of faded out. So you have to take that into consideration. If you wait too long, propagation is going to get worse. It's getting more daylight over in Asia. The other things too is to consider, you know, there's times where I've tried certain bands and they say, I can hear this guy on 17, but another part of the world's got good propagation. They're getting through. And I'll flip to a different band and say, I got through on 12. It took me 5 minutes. So you have to make sure that if there's other bands are open, you give them a try, because we have certain advantages, different times of day. And, you know, maybe there's a band where Europe has got great propagation. Well, go pick a different band where we can be more competitive. So listen for those type of things, find out about the operator and his pattern, know who's getting through. You know, if nobody in the Midwest is getting through, why try? In a way, it's like, do something else, or it's like, I'll have lunch now and I'll come back in a couple minutes. But remember to, go ahead.
I was going to say, Joe, wasn't there someone you worked because you were listening and they were up five, and then all of a sudden they just threw out a frequency and you went there? Does that ring a bell?
James Brooks, when he was on Scarborough, and we were on 20 meters, and of course I'm just calling, trying to work the guy, and right out of the blue, he said 257, and I thought, boy, that's strange. What's 257? So immediately I went up to 257 because he was on 14,200, and I went up to 257 and made one call and worked him. So it's key to listen to the operator.
And I think that that's the bullet here I really want to underscore is how much you can miss if you really don't listen. And if you really listen, it takes the difficulty way down. It doesn't make it easy, but it sure makes it easier.
Sure, yeah.
So this is based on the low bands, but I hear it a lot of times where really weak guys are calling. And I run an amplifier and you realize, well, a lot of the Europeans don't, or the other guys don't. So one of the tricks is, and this happens in the CWTs, the USA contest, when guys are just, it's like backscatter and they're running 100 watts or QRP, or got a dipole in the attic. And they don't realize that if I got the WA9, but I couldn't figure out the letters, don't send WA9 all the time, because I got that part. Send the stuff that I don't have. And then once I got it all figured out and put it together, I'll send the whole call sign. Or you can kind of like wait, and there's peaks in the QSB. And sometimes they're only, I don't know, 5 or 10 seconds, and then seems to be another peak and another valley. And some guys keep calling on this regular pattern. And it's like, you're always calling when the bands goes down. Delay about 3 or 4 seconds and then call. And maybe there'll be a different kind of a peak, or maybe there's, you know, some QRM and those guys stop. So the idea is do something different if you're not getting through. You know, the other thing too is figure out, well, sometimes the bands do peak before they start going down. So figure that out. But then also, sometimes it helps to be really fast, because if there's a bunch of like static ran, you might be able to send your whole call right between static crashes. So I mean, because I like high speed CW, it's like, I don't mind if you send it slow or fast, because sometimes if you do send it really slow, the timing is easier to figure out what the letters are. So that works. Another, send it fast and get between the static, and then choose your phonetics carefully, because there are guys, it's like, I still can't understand what you're saying. And so, you know, practice that, practice your timing. So there's some tricks if you're not to figure out how to get through. But I guess the biggest one is repeat the stuff that they don't have, or if there's a mistake in the call sign, you know, maybe they got the number wrong. And then, okay, well, I'm just going to send a number 8 a bunch of times. And the guy will say, oh, you're really an 8, and it's not a 9 that I've been sending to you. It's
You know,
the 8.
That's a great, I've never thought about that. Some reason, I get a lot of Alpha Juliet 8, but they don't get the Bravo. So
Mhm.
I will repeat the whole call again and again and again. That
See, you're
never occurred
wasting
to
the 3 characters. I would send the B, send the B, send the B, and then stick it all together. So because he already got maybe the AJ8,
Yeah.
and then he'll stick the B together. And once he repeats it, all you guys are done.
Never thought of that. So while we're here, how do you both feel about tail ending and full calls versus partials?
Couple things. CWTs are kind of high-speed CW practice. So they're a guy that both tail end with a partial call, and I know who it is. They're fast. You know, I love it when 2 guys call at once and I get both the calls at the same time, and then they get confused. But I like, for me, I like tail ending. But again, that's the practice on CW. So you can copy what you're supposed to be copying, but then also copy, oh, here's to the side, some guy tail ended and I got his call. So I don't mind tail ending at all if you do it correctly. I don't particularly, especially like partial calls, because why not just simple thing and be done with it, kind of a thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I always prefer the whole call, but I agree with Ralph. If I can get partial call, you know, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, if we know the guy, it's like, yeah, you can, you know, a lot of times if there's a lot of QRM, I might only get part of your call, even though I know you, but at least I come back to it. The other thing I'm pretty firm with is I've got part of a call. I don't want other people to be calling. I want to get that guy through and done. And he can be the puny, weakest guy. I don't care. I want to stick with him and let him get through. And I guess that's something that kind of irritates me when you got a partial call. That's the guy that I want and not anybody else. You know, sometimes you have to work the loud guy just to get him out of the way, but go back to the other guy again.
So Joe, what was Wayne's call sign? Was it Cade LEE?
Yes, K-L-E-E.
So I'd only met him a couple times, but we had an opportunity. He told me a story about being was he in Kosovo or 6 Oscar with you?
Montenegro. We was over.
Montenegro. He got so irritated because he kept saying full calls, and this guy kept yelling like, let's say it's 9 Zulu Oscar or Zulu Oscar. So finally he said, Zulu Oscar, you're in the log, and that's all he put in for you. So it's like, I do what I say, or I'm not going to work you. So what about FT8? I've learned a lot already. I'm really excited about this. So let's talk about FT8 for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, I do it because there's activity and it's kind of fun when there's a lot, but it's matured somewhat because people would always, when they spotted it, they like say the frequency of where the guy is transmitting. It's like, well, if my computer does decode, I don't care what the frequency is. That's redundant information. But I think you have to determine, is the guy doing multi-stream or is he doing Fox and Hounds, or does it really matter? And I don't know that it really matters. I like being able to do multi-streams because you can work them faster, type of thing. I mean, I've done it myself when lots of GAAs are calling, and I'll have 2 sessions so I can like work guys simultaneous, that kind of thing. But I think that's one of the things you have to do is, doesn't matter what DX cluster says it is, you have to know this guy doing it. And some expeditions are pretty good in saying, hey, we're going to be using Fox and Hounds, or we're not going to be using it. That'll clarify it. It doesn't, to me, make a whole lot of difference, what they're doing. I think one of the tips is, we've talked about it. If you just listen and just watch your screen, figure out, it's like, well, is there really a clear spot? Or, do you go kind of high in the audio frequencies and get up near the top where it seems to be clear? and then do that. But back to the FT8, fox and hounds, you have to be above 1,000. So, I guess one way you look at the screen just from arm's length and say, well, nobody's already down at the bottom. Maybe he's fox and hounds. There's other ways than that, but part of it is find yourself the clear spot. And it's the same thing as happens when on code or sideband trying to work a pile up. Figure out, and then here's the other thing. I mean, people just will like call sometimes. They can just look through and say, well, geez, East Coast is the ones that are getting through. It's like, I'll go off and do something else for a while, or find some other guy to chase. Another thing is if you can copy like around the United States, figure out like, well, here's where guys have been working them, and maybe it's high in demand or something like that, or there's a pattern to it. So keep track of guys that are getting through if you can copy them and get an idea, how they're completing the QS. So the thing that's interesting too, on 6 meters, a lot of times you don't see these other guys. He's just working like invisible people, and you can't see the other part of the QSO. I think in CW, it's easier to tell when there's QSB on the band, and that was always fun. Even on 6 meters CW, you wait for the peak, you blast out your call, and then he knows to come back during a peak, and you worked each other on CW. But the same thing is true. There's still going to be fades and peaks when you're an FT8, and you can watch their signals and say, oh, look, he's a -14, he's a -18, and then a minute later, like he's a -6. And you kind of see, oh, there is this fading going on. And when he's a -6, something up there is like, that's the time I'm going to call and try to get through. So the same thing applies looking for fades and peaks. And the other thing is, just like we've been saying, look at sunrise and sunset. And it's like, if you're trying to get a guy and it's, 11 o'clock local time, it's like, well, that may be way late for us to do it. And the East Coast is going to have a better shot because they're closer. So, it means tomorrow you get on earlier, you change your schedule. Remember, something doesn't work, you should try something different instead of keep doing the same thing that didn't work.
Yeah. Interesting.
So I wanted to work an XW4 on 60 because it's rare and I needed that band country, and there was an expedition and a good operator over there. So the idea is, you go through and you read their web pages and you say, some of these guys say, well, I'm only going to go 10 through 40 holiday style. Okay, so that's not going to work. But I'm always using what's our sunrise, what's our sunset, and I use Alexa for that a lot of times. N1MM will do it. You can get with DX Summit, those kind of things, and DX Lab. But the idea is to figure in your mind when sunrise and sunset. And then, if an expedition is going to be there for a week, you have to listen for every possible opening. And our peak time might be a little bit before sunrise, and it might be 10 minutes before sunrise and 5 minutes after. But sometimes an hour before sunrise is pretty good, and maybe that's when they're on. And because they probably are not necessarily aware of how the sun rises and moves across the United States. And they can, let's say that somebody that's, way off the other side of your far away, and he's trying to work, into the United States. So the East Coast is going to be better propagation, they're closer. And a lot of those guys are going to work them. And then they'll get into your area in Iowa, and you guys are next. And when I was really into some low band stuff, I could tell the difference between Southern Illinois and Central Illinois and the northern part of Illinois, and it would be just a couple minutes different for who had the peak. So arrive a little early because the guy's going to be on, and maybe there's not a lot of competition because people are waiting until closer to their sunrise. And the other thing that happens is, so once propagation is sort of past Illinois and you get into some place like Iowa and Kansas and Nebraska, well, once they've worked to one or two guys, nobody lives there, and they think propagation's over and they're gone. You got to wait till but now we're getting into Colorado and there's Denver and more populated areas. There's going to kind of be a pause, you know, Montana, you get into California, and the big guns will get through. So these guys at the other end don't necessarily know our population clusters and how it fits in with the sunrise. So you got to be there for that whole opening, because sometimes they might work in Ohio and then they'll quit because it's like nobody else is calling. Well, our sunrise isn't until maybe 45 minutes different than what yours is. So
Right,
the
right.
whole idea is be there and stay till it's late. So use your 1500 watts. If you can get some kind of receive antenna, you got to be vertical on your transmit antenna. And again, this is not necessarily the stuff for the 200 country guys, but this is a direction that you're heading for the next step. So notice that, you know, I realized that at our sunset, you know, the southeast beverage, I have a 1200-foot one that I put up for that long path. Sometimes you put it up and it's like, I didn't work anybody this year. I just do it again. But then the short path, you know, I just have to go like have this 1000-foot piece of coax and I switch the ends and, you know, change it around. But I also do like weather reports, and if they got bad storms in their area, then it's like, well, they're probably not going to be on. And then use low band reflectors. So there's a lot of planning if you're going to get that one station or an expedition and they're going to be on for a week or so, and you want to work them. This is a lot of work for one QSO. But
Yeah.
that you're doing that in a smaller scale when you're saying, I'm looking for country number 60. It's not going to be a common one, and you're going to have to do something a little different in order to catch him. So here's part of it. I mean, your own operating skills have to be good. You've got to make sure you know your call sign in CW. You know, so that when he comes back or has, the other thing is when you have things that are close to your call sign, to recognize, oh, that's a letter they normally mess up, and he's trying for me and he's not trying for somebody else. So, you know, recognize things that are, because I know sometimes guys start too soon, and so, you know, you look at like a K and it'll come out as like an N because you missed the first dit, that kind of stuff. So I like short practice sessions like CWT, or you got a lot of programs, Morse Runner, RUFZ. Listen to weak signals. Just get on the band and listen to puny weak signals and see if you can hear these guys. You know, just don't necessarily call, but that's part of it, is recognizing weak signals, and you know how to kind of in your mind think, oh, that was enough space, it could have been a dash. So I know because of the spacing from what I can hear what those letters are going to be, and that takes just lots of practice. But I think it helps to be able to tell when a guy is coming back to you. And then listen for the pileup, see what kind of patterns are in there. And you know, it takes a lot of patience. It may be the first day or the second day and you're not getting through, but you know, the propagation's not the same every day. I mean, if it was same, it'd be no fun if it was exactly the same
That's
every
right.
day. It's that variety that makes it difficult. It's a challenge. So in the shack, I do a lot of stuff. I have a regular paper calendar, and it's got like all the medical appointments, all the kids, grandkids, baseball games, grandparents' day, CWT, when we're watching the dog, all that stuff. So I have a paper calendar, and I go through DX News and NGCK, and I write in here, here's when all these DXpeditions are. And then, but there's this thing, I have a whiteboard that said, okay, this is the one that I'm going to be looking for. And then I'm lucky in my shack that I can sleep here, because I might be up at 2 o'clock in the morning, or I might just be exhausted. So, you know, if you have an easy chair, something like that's good. And make sure you get your wife who has a hobby of cooking and doesn't mind to bring stuff to the shack. Maybe it's too late to do that, I don't know, but you know, I don't have to go to the house for a day or so. I got some food and stuff here in the shack. You know, your equipment choice, there's a lot of good stuff out there now. You know, in the last few years, we have great radio. So to me, there's a lot of bells and whistles, and You know, I'm using Flex because it's kind of bulletproof. That concept of overloading and having a strong signal next to a weak signal, you can still hear the weak signal. So it doesn't matter. But I have a spare K3, so that's okay. You do need internet, and that's been a real challenge since we moved into the country here. You know, because we checked and the guys said, oh yeah, we can stream stuff here. And it's like, oh, well, it's a DS line at 2 megabits per second and it goes out all the time, you know. And so we got rid of the Frontier after a while. And, you know, the only way to make it reliable is, for some reason, I waited till the local guy was on vacation and then I placed a service call. So different guys would come out, you know, and they ended up cranking the speed because they call like Washington State, you know, 1,000 miles away to talk to those technical people out there. So we got it reliable, but, you know, I've tried half a dozen vendors. Right now we're using Starlink, which is, in my mind, still variable. If you were out in the boat somewhere, it would be fine, because what else do you have? I'm still not convinced, because we're in the country, you can lay miles of fiber in a day because there's nothing to get in your way, and you can go through internet or the intersections quickly because there's none out here. And it was frustrating because a friend of mine in Ireland, you know, he lives in a little cottage out in the middle of nowhere, and one day he said they knocked on his door and said, can we run fiber to your house? You know, we're doing it down your road. And it's like, yes, of course. And to me, that solves all these political meetings and funding. It's like, we'll just do it. But I also recognize the economics of, if you're in a subdivision, you can go a mile and about 10 houses. Well, here, I think it's about one house every couple miles, but we'd be with you forever. So
Yes, that's
you know,
right.
and it's sort of reliable infrastructure compared to what we have. So let's talk about improving your station. So, you know, if you can do a lot with a wire or a dipole, you know, or vertical, but when you get to the long haul stuff, you need low angle of radiation. So you got to figure out, where are you? So if you're at 30 feet with a tri-band, you're okay. But boy, those long paths, the distance stuff, they're going to be hard. So you might start out with an inverted V or a really low 160 antenna. And because I kind of have a good location, magic or exceptional, but the inverted V is okay, but I'm a couple days into an expedition before I can get some of this stuff, especially the far away. So you want to sort of progress to an inverted L and then a vertical with base loading, but it would be better if you change that to a vertical with top loading. So that's another one of my projects. I have a 60-meter vertical, even though that's not a band, but it's a good one, Joe.
Uh-oh.
Yes.
So I have a vertical out there, and the next piece for that, I mean, it's got 21 radials on it, but it's about 6 feet short. So that will switch over to become like top-loaded vertical and do that. But you know, you age and you realize, I'm the only one doing this stuff. My wife has no interest in measuring and cutting wires or soldering or any of that stuff. So everything takes a long while. So 160, that's kind of the general plan. I mean, and again, a tall tower, it's great. I mean, I've had a 120-foot tower with 4 elements and 40, and it's just super. But it's, you know, it is maybe not practical. The idea is you try to be tall on HF or have a vertical that's in the clear. You know, and I always thought verticals didn't work, and I don't think they really do work in the city, and there's a bunch of buildings around. I was just impressed. Our water table is so high. The local town here, about 3 miles away, there's only 3 houses that have basements. The water table is so high. I have to be careful when I like drive a stake into the ground and then pull it out. Water squirts out.
Really?
Really? Huh.
Believe what you want. Believe what you want. Anyway, but it is, you know, the sump pump runs a lot, and I'm thankful to my brothers. That's when we moved here, I had a to-do list of 150 items to fix and re-engineer, and we redid the sump pump so that you can pull out a plug and put an external hose in and a generator and keep on going. Those kind of things. I've spent a lot of time just re-engineering stuff so that my wife doesn't have to worry about it. So the next thing too is to say, do I need preamps? And it's really quiet out here. I do run a bit, almost always run a little bit of a preamp on the receiver because weak stations call me, or stations that aren't running the kilowatt or running pretty low power. I don't worry much about any noise cancellation because I can hear my neighbor's electric fence, but it has never stopped me from receiving anything. I like the SAL 30 because it's directional but not so directional as I don't miss a guy off the back if I'm doing a United States contest. So the SAL 30 will probably go up. I will put it up a little differently. Again, because it's so windy here, I will use the regular E-post instead of some of the smaller gardening ones just to make it sturdier. And the thing is, if you don't do this stuff in some kind of receiving loop, you don't know what you're missing, and a lot of the guys on 160 are they're missing stuff. And I realized that when I was comparing to Jerry WB9Z, we have the exact same 4 squares on 80, but his location is extremely good, high water table, but the elevation doesn't change within 3 feet as you look every direction in the horizon. It shows up on aeronautical maps as being flat, and when the river rises, he's had water come into his shack, and the river goes away. So it's different, but he had his beverages up and an SAL 30, and I just had the SAL 30. He can hear more on 160, but I don't have like a nephew or a cousin that can spend days helping me out. But the idea is you're extending your openings. Can you hear stuff earlier in the day and longer? Because there's less competition when the sun is going down low bands and you're one of the first in there and everybody's kind of waiting for sunset. If you can get in there a little bit early, you're in before the competition and you don't necessarily need that same signal strength. So those are some of the kind of improvements to think about, direction to head for your station. This is one of my kind of favorite things. When I taught marketing, I even made people learn more where is sunrise and sunset, because, for example, we use Australia for a test market for a lot of advertisements. It's like, well, so what time is it over in Australia now? Now I would just ask Alexa, but I passed around sunrise sunset charts in my marketing class so people would recognize that it's not the same everywhere in the world. But the whole idea is to figure out, on a band, and let's take 15 meters, not necessarily when the spots are great like right now, but in general, 15 meters is a daytime band. The sun's got to be up, it's on 15. When you're on 80 meters is like a nighttime band. 30 meters, it's kind of an intermediate. It's kind of a magic, both daytime and nighttime great propagation. But you have to kind of say, what is this band doing? And then, so you don't get on 80 meters at lunchtime and think you're going to work a whole bunch of DX. So you have to kind of realize and let's say, you get on 80 meters at 9 o'clock at night. And then you say, well, wait a minute, what time is that in Europe? Oh, well, that's like 3 o'clock in the morning. How many guys are going to be on? So it's better to wait until 11 o'clock at night and catch those guys at their sunrise. So you need to know which of the days and nights at different parts of the world. And that's where N1MM has got, a nice map, and I have some maps of sunrise and sunset. So you got to know that. You also have to know about where are the long paths, and they're seasonal. So there's some great stuff on 10 meters, like an hour or so after the sun comes up. We've got long paths that we won't hear for years, so we can point off towards kind of South Africa, and you can get Japan and that Cambodia, stuff like that is long paths. Last weekend, there was a lot of the way to get Australia was 2200 Zulu, 4 o'clock or so in the afternoon, point right east over Africa, because there's almost no Africans, and the guys in Australia would call it, because there's a path into Australia. One of the oddest things that ever happened to me on a long path was to be able to point towards east, go over top of Africa, keep going around the world, and be able to get a guy in New Zealand. And say, that's really far. And then as the band matured, I got a guy in Hawaii long path. And then I got a W6 long path. So once you know that there are things that are happening during sunrise and sunset, really unusual things with propagation, that's no time to basically sneak in there and get some of these unusual ones that are far away. So we have daily changes, time of day makes a big difference. There are fall and summer changes. To me, those are the cool time, spring and fall. As we start getting into the equinox time periods, we get a lot of these long paths. And then we know about the sunspot cycle, that year after year, we start seeing changes. And luckily, I think we've got a little bit of time on 10 meters, but, definitely take advantage of time now to try to get on and recognize, for us, the magic time is sunrise. And so, in my mind, I just follow the sun. Where is it in different parts of the world? And then, at our equinox, that terminator, the difference between when it's sunny and when it's nighttime, it's straight vertical. So it's kind of hard to work things that are like off of that vertical path, because the magic path is straight up and down, straight north and south as it comes right at our sunrise and sunset. So we just had that time period. And it's like, you can't work some parts of the world in Asia you might think of, but you can get stuff straight north and south. One of the problems with working straight north is you go through the auroral zone, but you're also going into areas that don't have a whole lot of ham population. So we think it's not open, I mean, there's not that many guys in India that are low band DXers, so the band, well, they're not that many high band guys either. They got a lot of noise, and the same is true. You get into areas that have a lot of, rain and storms every day, they're not going to hear you. So I a lot of times I'll just ask Alexa, what time is it in Tokyo? And, then I'll get closer. I can, use one of the programs on the computer, but, it really works well when I want to say, geez, these guys going to work. Is it 7 o'clock in the morning in Tokyo? And is it dark there still? Try to figure out, when's a good time to do that. So, I take a different view on propagation. Mine is like on the air. How do you work these guys? And I don't necessarily care about solar cycle and predicting if this cycle is going to be better or not. It's like, just get on the air and work them.
Right. Yeah, you're not going to work them by sitting and watching TV. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I can remember years ago, a lot of years ago, but do you remember when we used to chase Russian oblasts all the time? And I can remember listening to those signals coming over the pole, and it sounded like they were underwater. They just had that murky, but then you knew where they were coming from when you heard that. So that, I won't say it made it easy, but it was like, oh, okay, I got to go due north or maybe a little northwest, and there they are. But sometimes just listening to that signal and recognizing what's affecting it always helps too. So.
No, that's an excellent thing. I mean, that's why code is cool, or even on sideband, because they'd kind of be warbled and you would know that. So here's another thing. Talk about antipode. Antipode is like the exact opposite side of the world. What it really means is that any pathway that's open, you can use that. So you don't say, oh, well, let's see, got a beam kind of over South America to get to this place. It's like, it doesn't really matter if the band is really good in a certain direction. So there's a scientific station in the South Indian Ocean. It's better known as Amsterdam Island. And the FT8ZM 2014 expedition was just super. but the signals arrived from any path that was open. So 30 meters long and short path were almost happening at the same time. In the morning, you could work them as the sun was coming up. You could also point the antenna the opposite direction and work them that way. So it's like you do have two opportunities to work some of these guys, both sunrise and sunset at both ends. Pay attention to that unusual thing and don't just be driven by, oh, well, I always work Europe at 10 o'clock in the morning or something. Well, there's other stuff coming through about that same time. So that's kind of the thing that I wanted to mention there, that antipode is really important. And here's I'm showing a picture of that little station, kind of like a little village down there, but it's on the other side of the world from I use DX Summit, and you, Bill, you watch the timer. If you just, you can slice this as you want, because there's hundreds of things we can talk about.
Yeah.
But I use DX Summit as a tool. I mean, to figure out where is propagation, because you can just look at the screen and see who's spotting what, where are they coming from, is there any rare stuff in there, and then we kind of get into this the first few days of a DXpedition. You look at it and somebody's making a comment, please turn your antenna, and it's like they're using verticals or dipoles, and it doesn't matter. And why don't you have an online log? And it's like, well, our idea is to go there and work people. But I mean, we are seeing that change in technology. You do have online logs, because in the past you'd work them and you'd be rock solid and send in a card, and maybe 2 months later you get the response, your card came back. So some of that kind of stuff, is, it's like, hey, I worked them with, 10 watts, and I always want to reply, I worked them with 9.5 watts. But the good thing about DX Summit is you can find out where are the strong signals coming from, and know where the band is open with just a glance. And it's just a really great tool. Another thing, when you go to DX Summit, you can figure out what's propagation like elsewhere by using that option that they let you select BOCAP, BOA cap. And I wanted to work VU7 and 8Q7 on 10 meters for DXCC challenge. I need both of those, and they're pretty far away and they're rough paths. So you go to DX Summit, you find a spot, somebody spotted him, and it's like, I'm not hearing anything, And a lot of times, if it's in the Midwest, I can hear them, but people are spotting them and I can't hear anything. And then what I did is I changed my grid as if I was not in 50, and I made up one and said, okay, I'm in South America. And then I looked at the propagation forecast with OCAP, and 24 hours a day, they had 3 bands that were open. But we had no propagation here because they're a different season. They're south of the equator. And I'm wondering, why can't I work these guys? Well, I still haven't worked them on 10 meters. It's a really rough path. Now would probably be a good time. We got sunspots. So I do that kind of stuff. It's like, why everybody is hearing them, or maybe the East Coast hears them and there's nothing coming here. Change your grid and say, okay, well, what are the South Americans here?
I never thought of it.
We have nothing. So keep going, because I think I have some screenshots, which will be, yeah. So this shot right here is a whole page of VU7W in June, and I just did do a search for V7W, and it's like, look at that, they're everywhere. But I couldn't copy them anywhere. They're on FT8, I couldn't copy them. They're on 15 and 10 and 6 meters. They're on 12 meters, and I can't copy anything. Then I look at the comments, no QRV on 60 meters, what a shame. Oh, that's F68T. I mean, it was an alias for W8GEX, making that comment about they're on 60 meters. So, I mean, there's propagation, guys who are working them. mostly JAs, some stuff that's kind of in the Gulf Coast area is
Mhm.
getting mostly GA. So continue on and we can see why. So I put it back to say, okay, let's do propagation EN50 to VU7, my grid and what's happening. And it's like, okay, 1300 Zulu. I'm looking on 10 meters. There is no propagation, maybe a 10% chance at sunset, but not in the morning on 10 meters. And that's why I can't hear them. That's what we would expect. So, you know, it's long haul. I mean, look at that, 8,600 and some miles away. So go to the next one
Wow.
and we'll see. So here's what it is. If I change my grid to South America and I'm looking for VU7, holy smoke. Here we do. There's one place they've got 5 bands at the same time. No, they have 6 bands at sunset, 2300 Zulu. 6 bands are open from South America and different seasons than us. But you'll also notice nobody's got propagation on 80 meters. It's rough path.
Yeah.
And that my thoughts are you got to catch them at a solstice, spring or fall solstice to do it. But you know, here they are, 1900 GMT, 12 meters, 90% chance of propagation being open. If you have a little bit better antenna, you'll make it through. So one of the little tricks that I use with DX Summit to say, well, okay, I'm going to go out and mow the grass. We don't have propagation.
Wow. That is really, that's very, very smart.
I want to do the same thing for 8Q7. It's far away. Look at that, 9,164 miles from my house. Here it is. You would think, all right, 10 meters as the sun comes up, I should be able to work these guys. No propagation on 10, none on 12, none on 15. What's the deal? Why can't I work them? And okay, as at 000 GMT, you've got a couple, but you know, 40% chance is our best of working AQ7. And again, expeditions, they're going to sort of follow where the propagation is and where guys are calling them, and they're not going to necessarily look for the, oh, we have a tiny window and we can work a few Midwest guys and it's their one chance out of year. They're going to go for the volume, you know, unless it's a big expedition and they're there for a long time and they whittle down the pileups. They're going to have plenty to do to work in the major areas. All right, keep going. All right, so look at this. Here we go. Same deal. South America, same time as us, 100% chance, but you're in South America. You
Right.
get on to after lunch, late afternoon, they've got rock solid 100% on 4 bands. 2 other bands have got propagation. We didn't have any from the Midwest. But that just explains to me when I'm thinking, it's like, oh yeah, well, they're different season than us, you know.
Wow.
And that's the hard part when you're planning an expedition. You don't live year round, but you just pick when you can go, when the cards are right, or there's, you know, some other reason that you know got able to book the boat to get there, and that's when you go. But there's other propagation different times of year, so that's what kind of makes it interesting. It's not the same every time and every DXpedition. They're going to go at different times. And you look at the stuff that's going way down to the South Pole, they're not necessarily going to go in the middle of their winter. You know,
Right.
it's just not practical, but that might be the best propagation time. I had another goal. I wanted to work Mongolia on 11680. So since I couldn't work that stuff on 10 meters, I picked a different end. And so I looked at my knee. I looked at DX News, DX Summit. Hey, there was a low band 2-man DXpedition to Mongolia. And my thoughts were, I got to try every opening. That means both at sunrise and sunset. I pay attention to my sunrise, sunset, and their sunrise and sunset. That gives me 2 chances a day, plus there's a little bit of overlap. So my plan was I needed a 1,200-foot beverage to the south, east, and then I needed to have some path beverages. And then I had that 65-foot vertical wire in the tree for 80 meters and then inverted V at 84 feet for 160. So that was my plan. Now, if we think back some other stuff, inverted V is not a very good antenna for 160, especially at this height. You got to be 160 feet. But vertical would be better for my plan, and I'm still heading that direction. If you guys want to do tower work for the next summer, come on out. So that's plan. All right. I had to figure out how I could work these guys. So go to the next and we'll see. Oh, so here's another trick you need to know, and especially on 6 meters. We think of the general call signs in the United States, W1 through 6, east to west, some zeros in there, history is involved. So, aside from all these guys moving around, or Hawaii can be in Virginia now, that kind of stuff. Other countries have call districts based on the letters. So in Argentina, near the capital city, Buenos Aires, about the center of the country, north to south, the A, B, and C. So you can have an LU1A and an LU9A, and they could be neighbors. They don't do it by number. So in the last week, we were having some mild openings to South America, some PYs, some LUs, and just like you're looking for a CP or a CX, or if it matures to a CE4 and goes all the way to the ZL7DX on 6 meters, working for when is the band open to the lower part of Argentina. So that would be the LUs with the letter WX are the low part. So I saw these guys. There was an LU1W and one with an X. And the next thing that popped through a few minutes later was Falkland Islands. It's in the same general area as them. So those are your clues. When you see Y1s and 2s, it's like your northern part, you're not getting the distance. Stuff may happen on 6, but if you're looking for the farther away stuff, or the stuff that's like the CXs, some of the rare stuff, you got to be looking in the farther south parts to see what's happening there. Next slide. So here's a similar thing. So the northern stuff is the PY8s.
Mhm.
So when we hear, and that would be more common because they're closer to us. So we would hear 6 meters open to PY8. When you start hearing some of the 5s and the 3s, the band is moving to the south, and we have a chance at some of the stuff that's further away. But you can see why in a regular HF contest, the PY7s are pretty strong. The PY5s are strong because they're up on the north side near the Caribbean type of thing.
Wow.
So that's just another thing to be aware of, is that other part. So DXing has this technical side, the sun, the antennas, there's timing, propagation, station design, equipment, and technique. And that's, to me, the fun part about DXing. Let's see what's next here.
Oh, I saw this picture. This is great.
That is by chance. Two of my grandsons ended up, they're on the same team. They at random picked a 7 and a 3 for their baseball numbers.
Okay, well, very good. I think
Yes.
we covered everything, Bill, and Ralph, thanks a million. It's number one, nice to see you again.
Oh,
and
for
just
sure.
A
This is
great
fun.
presentation.
Good.
Yeah, and then we'll see you in the DX Lounge later in the week. So
Oh, I'm looking
Yes.
forward to that.
yeah,
That's
that'll
really
be
fun.
good. All right.
Alrighty.
Well, thank you guys
Thank
so
you so
much.
much.
And,
All right.
and I appreciate it. I look forward to working with you, Ralph.
All right. Thank you. Bye, guys.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.
I hope you found that as interesting and helpful as I did. Heck, the second time I went through to edit it, I was taking more notes. I know I learned a lot. Thank you for joining us on this edition of the DX Mentor. I would like to thank our sponsors, ICOM America, the Daily DX, DX Engineering, and the Southwest Ohio DX Association. You won't find anyone more committed to DX than these sponsors. I would especially like to thank our guests today and in the first episode, Ralph K9ZO and Joe W8GEX. I would love to have your feedback, answer your questions, and provide help with any DX or amateur radio issues that you may have. If you need clarification on something or you just have a question, email me at thedxmentor@gmail.com. Please drop me a line if you have achieved an all-time new one, receive recognition, or have a DX event that you would like us to mention. We would be happy to do that. If you're enjoying these DX Mentor episodes, please hit the subscribe button. You can also click like if you found this one particularly interesting. If you don't want to subscribe and you're not interested, please drop me a note and let me know why. I just want to get better. 7-3 for this episode, and thanks to my ex-wife Karen for her love and support. I hope to see you in the pile-ups.